For those of you who have attended an alumni forum in Chapel Hill, you know the joy of having our own philosopher in residence. We have someone in our Morehead-Cain family who is a renowned business and leadership speaker, and he's always been so generous to speak at the end of the forum to help us kind of wrap it up, figure out what it was we just experienced and learned together, and he has offered to do the same thing this spring with our 7 speaker series. And so Tom Morris, class of 1974, we welcome you and we give you the floor.
Thanks, Megan. You guys, so good to see your faces. Thanks for joining us for this this bonus session. I'm glad Megan named it a bonus session rather than a superfluous session or a redundant session, or it was easier to promote that way. I was really surprised when she decided to add this on and asked me to do it. You know, I was really pleased, but I had no idea why. I mean, as she mentioned, she's always had me do the last session for the forum every 3 years, and that's a real honor, but the reason is pretty obvious, right? She needs to clear out the room and clear out the building, and nobody can do that like a philosopher. But Zoom, of course, is different, and this gave me an idea. Maybe we should make all our top medical researchers do a philosophy Zoom hour with me every week until there's a vaccine and a decisive treatment for COVID. Next week, metaphysics. I think we'd have a cure in record time. We're going to have some fun today. I'm going to review what everybody said, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about me to start with. For those of you who don't know me, I grew up in Durham, just a few miles from Chapel Hill, in a tiny little 800 square foot rental house in a family where nobody on either side of the family had ever gone to college. We had 2 meals a day. My grandparents didn't have running water. Indoor plumbing, we barely did. My mother told me in high school, there was no money for me to go to college. So I should figure out what I wanted to do after graduation and get a job. But then we got this amazing letter that I had been nominated for a Morehead scholarship. And, you know, here we are 50 years later for me, able to learn so much from all of you in contexts like the forum and like this. It means a lot to me. So I just wanted to start off with a plea to let's keep up this sharing and learning with each other. Let's do even more. We have this great community across space and time made up of people who showed a degree of promise, at least when we were young. We can keep that flame alive, and we can keep living the promise. So thank y'all for being at a session like this. It's going to be fun to do. A month ago, I started writing an essay. And I spontaneously wrote as my first sentence, "We live in challenging times." And then I looked at the sentence and I realized, well, wait a minute, so has everybody else in human history. What have they done to get through their challenges that we need to learn? I started realizing, staring at that sentence, maybe our problems aren't just interruptions. Maybe our problems could be the path to becoming who we're here to be and for doing what we're here to do. That insight has kind of been reflected in all the 7 talks with how our colleagues, our cousins have talked about the challenges in their own lives. You know, in April, which now seems like a year ago, right? Maybe even longer than that, Shilpi Gowda talked to us about creativity and the importance of stories in our lives. She spoke to us about daily discipline and the fact that there's no one path to achievement in any creative field. And of course, the subtext is every field is a creative field. So no one and only path to achievement. But then she shared with us about her process. My family loved hearing that she goes really quiet and talks really little when starting a new project. And I think they're hoping I'll adopt that practice pretty soon myself. She gave us some great advice in her session, like don't be too quick to share your writing with other people. A warning I wish I'd heard about 30 books ago. But in my scrawled notes, I took 2 pages of notes on each of the 7 talks, and I can hardly read my own handwriting. In my scrawled notes, it looks like she may have mentioned some YouTube videos like how we make fried salmon patties and how to look good on video calls for Zoom, the latter of which I obviously haven't consulted yet. She reminded us that whatever our quest is, it's good to have restorative activities in our lives. In her own case, she mentioned painting and piano and gardening, and I've been doing a lot of gardening this week. Very, very cool to have things that kind of release the pressure of our professional duties. I mean, you can't see it right now around me, but I've got 4 electric guitars in my study. You can see the books, right? That's the work. But the restorative activities, I'll pick up a Carolina Blue Fender Stratocaster and just play for 20 minutes. And that sort of brings me back into the state of mind I need for tackling, Epictetus or somebody. Second up was Tom Trevani, our man on the Late Late Show with James Corden. He was up for the second and final of our late 7 talks at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., when my brain starts to power down and look for something less challenging than discursive thought. But Tom's session was so amazing. His story was so fascinating, and his advice was so great. He kept me energized the whole time. You may remember, if you were here for that session, he went into investment banking and private equity, and that ended up leading to brain surgery where all his finance neurons were removed, and he transitioned into a career in comedy where otherwise most people would say you need to have your head examined, but he had already had that taken care of in his case. Tom, like Shilpi, reminded us of how our careers and our life paths can look crazy from the outside and take a lot of courage from the inside if we want to be true to who we really are. His message was trust yourself. That's played a big part in my own life, having left a full professorship at the University of Notre Dame, a guaranteed job for life, to go out into the world and hang up my shingle as an independent philosopher, something that hadn't been done since Ralph Waldo Emerson about 150 years ago. I had to be true to myself. I had to trust myself. That was a great message. He advised us to ask, when confronting a new situation, what's the worst that can happen? And he pointed out that in most circumstances, at least those not involving brain surgery, the worst is we'll fail, we'll learn, we'll get a great story to tell as a result. And I've had that happen lots of times in my life. So we should try. If we're really being nudged and goaded and pushed with a new idea, don't let fear keep us back, but say, what's the worst that could happen? And Tom was right. In most cases, we're just going to get a great story out of it that will entertain and educate other people. He said, I think that one of the most important things Tom said was the process is the joy. That to me was a huge takeaway from his talk. It was not the accolades in his life. It wasn't the completed successes and the high achievements, but it was the process itself. And that was reinforced in an interesting and unusual way in the very next talk, talk 3. George Hodgin, our Navy SEAL and medical marijuana maven, shared some amazing stories and insights from his own really unexpected path. One of those insights was to find a partner who can pick you up when you fall. This is right out of the book of Proverbs in the Bible. And it's embedded in some of the Superman stories where there's the character Robin plays in. You'll find a partner, somebody to pick you up when you can fall. Some of the greatest literature is about the power of partnership. I mean, I reread the Iliad a couple times last year. Nobody ever told me Homer's Iliad is about the power of partnership. Agamemnon and Achilles, and they have a real purpose together that creates a great partnership, but then it comes apart because they forget their shared purpose. You can go throughout human history from the ancient epic of Gilgamesh on. You can see the power of partnership. George talked about that. He advised us to be opportunistic, to seek a daily sense of fulfillment and purpose in whatever we're doing. Again, Tom's process. The process is the joy. He said, be an optimist. And he gave us the best juggling analogy. I mean, I hadn't heard this before. You may have, but it was new to me. He said, you know, we're all typically juggling several things at the same time. The advice is don't drop the glass ball, right? So we always have to figure out which ball that is, right? Of all the things we're juggling, what's the one thing that could really break? Protect that thing. Oh yeah, and manage your fear. He talked about managing fear. Navy SEAL, understandable, right? But also in the business context, he was talking about use your breathing, center yourself. Then you can do some pretty tough things, which his life has demonstrated throughout. Okay, talk 4 was Angela Liu, our lawyer, who told us this amazing classic immigrant story about her parents coming to America with $400 and a dream, and then finding out how hard the dream can be, even in a place thought of as the land of opportunity. I got to tell you, I was pretty shocked to hear about the racism she's faced lately because of widespread anger about what a lot of people insist on calling the Chinese virus. And she felt kind of singled out in public places often. You know, before our ongoing problem of racism recently erupted like a volcano in the past few weeks, Angela opened my eyes to its ubiquity in a way that was unexpected, at least to me. I left her session thinking, you know what, there's a pandemic in our nation that's not about biology, but about biography, about the beliefs, attitudes, emotions, and actions that form people and cause them to think and act as they do. Her story of being a Chinese American reminded me, by a stark contrast with so many of the things she's experienced, of the ancient practice of hospitality as a chief moral virtue that we all need to embody in our time. Well, the next session was talk 5, cousin James Elsmore from the UK, who blew my mind with his college study of tropical islands. I mean, who chooses to study tropical islands as a path of using discovery funds for, well, what may count as the single greatest scam in Morehead-Cain history? I mean, I tip my hat, and I'm so jealous. I mean, why didn't I think of that? Yeah, I picked philosophy. And of course, anybody who chooses philosophy over the study of tropical islands maybe isn't smart enough to be a philosopher. James found a problem that needed solving. And so that island people around the world, without using budgets they didn't have to travel, could get together virtually and share their difficulties and solutions and best practices over something like Zoom. And so he was the perfect person to advise us on how to do it right. If he's part of our session today, he's probably making a list about how I'm doing it wrong right now. But, oh, by the way, in his session, talking about how to use these media we have now, while he was talking, I happened to notice Chuck, our fearless leader, on the screen. I don't know if you all were part of that session and you noticed this too. Did you notice Chuck? I mean, he was so perfectly self-disciplined for Zoom. I mean, like a Zen master in a Zoom dojo. I mean, everything James was talking about, there was Chuck. You perfectly, he was sitting so still. It looked like he had put a photo up rather than using his computer camera for live video. And the longer I noticed that, unlike me, he wasn't moving at all, I came to be torn between sending him a chat note to praise his amazing stillness, or maybe calling Chapel Hill 911. But he finally moved, and I could relax. Chuck is just amazing. Chuck, you're my role model. I mean, you couldn't tell it to look at me and follow me around. I fall far short, but thank you for being you. Next talk, Brian Strong's really nice discussion of the uncontrollable in life. 2 weeks ago, when the world seemed to rise up around us to illustrate his theme. He showed us how we can use, first of all, the things we learn at work in an equally productive way in our private lives. I mean, that's a revelation to a lot of people, right? Planning and focus aren't just for professional challenges, but when we use some of those best practices in our personal lives, some amazing things can happen. I remember when I first met Stephen Covey, when he was getting all the attention for his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We led a weekend retreat together for 50 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and their spouses. And Stephen talked about families having mission statements. At the time, nobody was talking about that. It was just for work, right? But Brian said some really important things about how we can use what we learn at work in other contexts. And, you know, with all the uncertainties and uncontrollable factors in life right now, for all of us, we need to carve out some area in which we can exercise a measure of control to make good things happen. I started rereading the Discourses of Epictetus and his manual the other day. And I think it was the first sentence of the manual was, some things are within our power, others aren't. We should focus on the things we can do something about. And as we focus on the things in our power, we expand that circle. The Q&A in Brian's talk was amazing. On the call, one of our cousins, Ivana Devine, said something in the Q&A session that's important for our social time. She used the words, "I'm trying to be productive in my anger." And that was a very important thought. Anger is a powerful form of emotional and motivational energy that can provide focus and break inertia in our lives. And yet it can be really dangerous, both short-term and long-term, as Ivana's remark hinted. You know, it brought back to me Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, where he teaches us to ask about anger when we begin to feel it, which is really important and also really hard, to ask the questions, toward what or whom am I feeling this? For what reason? In what measure? For how long? And to what purpose? I mean, think about that for a second. Toward whom or what? For what reason? In what measure? For how long? And to what purpose? The Stoics later on pointed out that it's important for us to take charge of our emotions so they won't take charge of us. Okay, I'm riled up, I'm outraged, I'm mad. What's the most productive way to use the energy? I know, maybe I should get on Twitter and find somebody who needs the swift correction of sweet reason, right? Well, they're certainly there, but in large numbers, but maybe I can find a more productive use of my energy and time. And in the same Q&A session, Keith Beasley, class of 19, spoke to that. He talked about not wasting our energy on non-helpful people. I wrote down next to his name in my notes, inner peace and great partnerships. Again, back to the theme of partnerships. And of course, last week, Emma Den came to us from Senegal. So amazing, and shared her experience of running the USAID response to COVID in that country. She gave us 7 lessons that involve remembering there's no such thing as a perfect decision in any set of circumstances, so we shouldn't be paralyzed. You know, we're like artists painting our way forward on the blank canvas of the uncertain at all moments. It's not worth fixating, she said, on what we don't know in any challenge. Again, back to the Stoics, right? Take charge of those things you do know and try to expand the circle. She reminded us that uncertain times call for creativity and innovation, and that in any long-term challenge, self-care is a must. As we seek to do good in the world, we run marathons and not just sprints. That was important to be reminded of because, again, as I was rereading the Stoics recently, they talk a lot about self-care. They talk about philosophy as care of the soul, that we need to keep ourselves healthy inside, a healthiness of spirit, so that we can do our proper good in the world, you know, over the long term. So I just whipped through all these sessions we've had. There's been a lot of wisdom in the sessions. I've just kind of scratched the surface. So what is wisdom? I mean, that's kind of a question that naturally rises up when you think about all these little nuggets of insight we've had shared with us. A college student from Madrid, Spain, came to see me last year. He wanted to have breakfast with me. I thought, wow, we could have done a Zoom, but he came to Wilmington, North Carolina, and we sat down at breakfast. And in the way that college students have, and that sometimes people from other countries do, he just kind of asked his big question. He says, "What is wisdom?" And he says, Tom, I have a question. What is wisdom? And I thought, okay. So I gave him a little bit of thing about, wisdom is embodied insight for living. It's not just ideas, it's dispositions and habits of discernment and value. And so I went a little bit like this, and he was taking some notes and he was writing it down. And then it suddenly occurred to me something I'd never said to anybody before, which is one of the points of our talking to each other, right? I said, wisdom is guidance and guardrails. And he says, well, what is guardrails? And I said, you're up in the mountains driving on a narrow road, and around the curves, there are these metal railings to keep your car from going off this. Oh, yes, guardrails. I said, wisdom is guidance pointing the way forward. And it's guardrails to keep you from falling off the edge on tight turns. He said, I never thought of it like that before. We've gotten a lot of guidance and guardrails in these short 7 talks. I've got an image for you. In fact, I want to share a few quick images, and I'll shut up. But image number 1, an old wagon wheel. Imagine an old wagon wheel rolling down the bumpy road of time and change. And now picture yourself as a tiny little creature living somewhere on that wheel. The philosophers have taught us that most people live out toward the outer edge of the wheel, so that when the wheel turns, they're whipped to great highs and terrible lows. Now, Boethius uses this in his Consolation of Philosophy in 552 AD. The wheel of life, if you're too close to the outer rim, you're going to be whipped around. It'll be terrible whiplash. Oh, this is great. This is wonderful. This is terrible. This is awful. Back and forth and back and forth. Wisdom places us closer to the hub of the wheel. Now, the wheel's still going to turn, but we won't be so wildly whipped about inwardly. We'll be in a place of greater peace and a place of greater power. I've always loved that image. The philosophers have provided us with a lot of wisdom about dealing with times like we're living through right now, right? Where we've got not just one kind of crisis going on, but multiple kinds of crisis. And a lot of people have in their own lives other things layered on top of what's being shared in public by all the rest of us, right? And it's like, how much can a person take? I wrote a book over 15 years. I wrote it 25 times till I thought I could finally get it right. It had 5 different titles. It's in response to the old advice I grew up with in Durham, North Carolina. I must have heard it 100 times. When life hands you lemons, Tommy, make lemonade. Everybody said it, but nobody said how. So I decided in 2002 to go back and look at what the great philosophers might have said about how to turn lemons into lemonade in our lives. In other words, when bad things happen, it's important to be resilient, to bounce back. And it's important to have what Angela Duckworth at Pennsylvania recently has been calling grit, the ability to kind of grit your teeth, soldier on. Both those things are important for life success, right? Resilience and grit. But the lemons to lemonade philosophy is a little bit more than that, right? It doesn't just say when life hands you lemons, bounce back to where you were. It doesn't just say when life hands you lemons, grit your teeth and soldier on, carry those lemons. No, it says be transformative. Be radically transformative. Engage in a kind of a spiritual version of what the ancients called alchemy, right? Turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, or showing that the extraordinary was buried in the ordinary to begin with. So my little book is called Plato's Lemonade Stand. stirring change into something great. And just came out a few months ago, which people are saying, what are you, some genius? You knew who we were going to be going through. Life was going to be dumping mountains of lemons on us. No, I had no idea. I just knew the book was supposed to be out this year. But I want to share with you one thing in the book that I've had to use so many times in my life, I can't even recount them all. What I call the art of self-control. Whenever anything bad happens, so many of the great philosophers in every wisdom tradition have said the exact same thing. They said, do three things in the face of any lemons falling into your life. First of all, don't rush to judgment. Secondly, value the right things. And thirdly, use your imagination well. Think about those three things. First of all, don't rush to judgment. Don't be too quick to say, oh, this is terrible, this is awful, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. Because it may not turn out that way at all, right? And I've got this little image that has meant a lot to me. I mean, I want you to use your imagination for a second. And maybe even close your eyes if you want to. And imagine yourself as, well, Captain Jack Sparrow, okay, Johnny Depp's character in Pirates of the Caribbean. You're on deck of the ship, the pirate ship. You're the pirate captain. You see a dot on the horizon. You pick up the old pirate telescope. And you look through it to see what's coming. And it makes everything out there look bigger and closer, right? Well, the philosophers have taught me that there's an emotional telescope in all of our minds and hearts. And when anything bad happens, we pick up that pirate telescope and look through the small end like everybody does, and we make everything look bigger and closer and more imposing than it actually is. The philosophers have advised us, turn that telescope around. Turn it around and look through the big end. Shrink things down to size. Put things at a distance. And know that you're big enough, you're powerful enough, you have time enough to deal with whatever you face. It's amazing to me how many times in my life I've actually said to myself in the last few years, turn that telescope around. And it's made like an instant difference in my feelings. And a character in one of my novels, The Oasis Within, he tells his nephew, 13-year-old nephew, that story about doing that. And he says, the ultimate wisdom is mostly about perspective. And the ultimate truth is, once we learn the wisdom of perspective, we can just put the telescope down and look at things as they are and realize that, yeah, we're big enough, we're strong enough, we're capable enough, we're creative enough to deal with anything that comes our way. Number two, value the right things. If all we value is comfort and security, we're going to be in trouble when change happens, especially disruptive change. The philosophers have said value growth, value learning, value challenge. I was reading a book the other day. I wish I had it right here on my desk so I could show it to you, by a Buddhist nun, a category I didn't even know about, a Buddhist nun named Pema Chodron. And she talks about how confronting obstacles is life's journey. All these things we face, rather than saying, oh no, we should embrace these things. In fact, I wrote a book about Steve Jobs called Socrates in Silicon Valley a few years ago. And a friend, a businessman from India, international business his whole life, he came to me one day and he said, oh, I love your book about Steve Jobs. It's my favorite book about a leader I've ever read. I said, really? What did you like about it? And he said, you taught me. And then he goes on to tell me something I didn't even realize was in the book. Right? And that's, again, why we talk to each other. He said, you taught me that Steve Jobs became what he became, and Apple became what it became, because he picked problems big enough for his spirit, big enough for his talent. And this guy, Vinod Rangra, says to me, too many people pick only tiny problems they know they can solve. They don't pick problems big enough to get excited about. They don't pick problems big enough to stretch themselves, right? So don't look at problems as something that's, oh, this is unfortunate, you know, this gets in the way. Look at problems as something to embrace, and pick problems form us, they grow us, and sometimes they define us. So pick big problems in your life to solve. Value the right things and use your imagination well. I drew you a picture. I didn't want to use PowerPoint today, which I always use at the forums. So I drew you a little picture, and then my cat chewed off the bottom of the piece of paper. Okay, this is you. This is you, and you're leading a group of other people. And let's say you set it as your goal to get to the highest point in the area from which you'll be able to survey all the surrounding terrain. And from where you stand, the highest point you can see is Hill A. Okay, so you're the leader. You lead the group up Hill A. You slip and you fall and you struggle. You finally get to the summit, from which vantage point you can now see for the first time the much higher he'll be. Now, I've told this story for 20 years and said to groups, if you're on top of Hill A and your goal is to get to the highest point in the area, what's the first thing you're going to have to do to attain your true goal? And everybody yells out, go downhill. Yeah, that's right, go downhill. There's too many people stuck on Hill A, personally and professionally, because nobody wants to go downhill, metaphorically representing changing what you've most recently been doing. I got a Facebook post the other day from a lady who said, I heard you speak 15 years ago at Pebble Beach, California, and you talked about Hill A and Hill B. And she said, I just realized we've all in our culture been on a very high Hill A for a number of years now. And this pandemic, we've all been shoved off the top of Hill A at the same time. And she said, as we're tumbling down the side and everybody's yelling and complaining, and she said, it's those of us who know there's a Hill B out there, who have hope, who have confidence, who are going to get someplace innovatively that we maybe never could have gone had all this not happened. I thought, man, I hadn't even seen that application in my own little drawing, right? Use your imagination well in times like this. There's a Hill B out there. There's a Hill C out there. You know what? I was reading Seneca. Seneca said no boxer goes into the ring with confidence until he's been knocked black and blue, bruised, until he's felt his teeth shatter almost under his opponent's fist, until he's tasted the ground as a result of a blow. He said then he can go into his next contest with confidence. And I was reading in Epictetus. I mentioned Epictetus. He tells a similar story. He says, suppose you decide to become an Olympic wrestler, okay? And suppose you've got resources, so you hire the very best wrestling coach. What's he going to do? He's going to throw at you every obstacle, every adversity, every opponent, and the worst opponents he could possibly find out there, namely the strongest, the youngest, the most brutal. He's going to put you through all that. Why? So that you will increase in agility, in strength, and in wisdom for the contest of wrestling. Well, Epictetus says that's what's being done to us right now. We're being prepared for a contest much more important than just a sporting event. And he said, when the obstacles come into your life, when you face the adversity, say to yourself, I am being prepared to increase in agility, strength, and wisdom. That's wild. As I've listened to the 7 talks over the past weeks, I've been so thankful for what you all are experiencing in your lives. And I wish I could talk to everybody. I mean, it's been super, because at the forum, I only get to see, as many talks as I can get to, but I don't get to see them all. And this little series, I've gotten to see every talk, and they've all been a blessing to me. But what I really wish is that we could all sit down one-on-one and have conversations about them all. I just appreciate Megan giving me the time to do this little wrap up and share my own perspective on what we're learning about maybe not just surviving, but also coming to thrive amid disruptive change. A famous psychologist said to me 3 or 4 weeks ago, he said, I can't wait till about 6 months to a year from now, we're going to see more innovations maybe than any other period in modern history. May that be true. And may we all come to flourish in our own lives and careers. That's my talk that went on for a lot more than 7 minutes. Thanks, Megan.
You had permission. You had full permission to talk longer than 7 minutes. I am happy to invite people to just unmute and ask Tom any questions you might want to have.
I have a quick question. Well, not really. It's in fact a very big question. But Tom, the thing that concerns me in both the UK and the US is how much division there is. What do you think the solution is? How do you persuade people that unity is always going to produce a better society than division, when at the moment so many people seem to want to choose one side over another rather than reaching across a divide?
That's a great question, James. I think that, nobody would think that a sports team is going to succeed where everybody on the team fights each other, or the team is divided into two factions, right? And Notre Dame, when I was at Notre Dame in 1988, we won the national championship. And I had pretty much all the football players in my big philosophy class at one point or another. And they had a motto that year, and it was the only year they had the motto, "I'm here for you." That was their little slogan, "I'm here for you." You know, I'm not here for me, I'm here for you. There was more unity and harmony on that team than, and I was there 15 years. I saw a lot of teams come and go. That was the team of unity. That was the team of harmony. I wrote a book in the mid-90s that came out in 1997 called If Aristotle Ran General Motors. It's really not a book about Aristotle or about General Motors. It's really a book about life. And I decided to focus on what the philosophers call the four great transcendentals: truth, beauty, goodness, and unity. My claim was that we have, from the time we get up in the morning to the time we go to sleep at night, we have four dimensions in our lives. We experience the world intellectually, we need truth; aesthetically, we need beauty; morally, we need goodness; and spiritually, we need, and I was searching for a term, kind of connectedness. So I came up with the term unity, and then subsequently discovered a lot of great philosophers in the past had used exactly that word, right? And then the way these four things work is that unless you respect and cultivate all four will suffer. And what creates unity? The right approach to truth, beauty, and goodness. That creates unity. And how do you persuade people that this is important? You know, if I were given the task of walking into a room of very divided people, I would try to tell stories, first of all. And you know the power of stories, you know, and philosophically just as important as for any other reason, that I would tell stories about successful groups, whether it's George and his Navy SEAL team, or whether it's the Notre Dame football team, or whatever, where people were in harmony. They were unified around a core purpose, right? And then when they fall away from that, like Agamemnon and Achilles, you know, and thousands of people died as a result, you pretty much learn the lesson. It's in your own interest, right, to stop this divisiveness and to get back together with other people. It always, for a lot of people, it comes down to self-interest, right? So you have to show them that it's not just, we're not asking them to be altruistic. We're not asking them to be world-class philosophers. We're asking them to do things that are ultimately in their own self-interest, right? Nobody wants to live amid chaos. Nobody wants to live in circumstances that are Hobbesian, you know, a war of everybody against everybody else. And so how do we do that? Unity. How do we do that? Truth, beauty, and goodness, right? You go on social media today, I have to look hard. I'm like Diogenes with the lamp looking for the honest man, right? Trying to find some truth, beauty, and goodness. And I try to curate my own pages on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn so that I see more of that every day, the truth, beauty, and goodness. And so I think we just need to be out there telling stories. And that I have this belief, it's almost like a Hegelian thing, although, you know, I hate to admit that in public, but Hegel had this view of history that it swings from one extreme to the other: thesis, antithesis, higher synthesis, right? So I've always said to people that the worse things get, the more of an optimist I become. The reason being boiled frog syndrome. People can tolerate amazingly bad stuff. Like I went to Russia right after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Everybody's yards had weeds 3 feet high. There was graffiti on all the buildings practically. I thought, how could people live like this? You know, we can tolerate almost intolerable things, but when things get so bad, swinging the pendulum till they become literally intolerable, it's a wake-up call to everybody's imaginations, right? And that's when things can start to change. And that's why Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge, because that's what moves us, right? And so you and I, in such different fields, yet we both do things to appeal to people's imaginations. We both, like I like to use visual images, right? Because the best philosophical ideas have no purchase on people's hearts unless you can use an image that will move people. So that's what I would do. I think it looks like a long, hard slog, but sometimes when there's a tipping point, things suddenly happen quicker than you think they ever would, like the breakup of the Soviet Union, like the Berlin Wall coming down, right? Nobody predicted that. The experts never know. And I'm a big fan of experts. I'm a big fan of expertise, but you've got the black swan, right? You've got the Taleb stuff. Nobody saw this coming, right? Nobody ever sees anything big coming. And so what we think, oh, this is going to take us a long time to dig our way out of this problem of disunity and all that. Maybe it won't. Maybe we can come to a tipping point because of that pendulum swing. So I'm optimistic about it. But if you have any ideas, send me an email.
Thanks,
Anything
Tom.
else? Yeah, thanks, James. And feel free if you think of something else too. Yeah.
Maybe another simple question beyond truth, beauty, transformation, and goodness. The other transcendental question, at least in America.
Yeah.
It isn't just a matter of unity versus division.
Yeah.
It specifically is an issue of race and racism that is centuries old. What does Epictetus and the Stoics have for that?
Yeah, you know, Epictetus was an interesting guy. Epictetus had been a slave for the secretary, Nero's secretary. And he was educated because he was seen to be a smart kid, and he was granted his freedom. And so Epictetus became what I call the philosopher of liberation. Epictetus, so he moved to the beach in, I think it was northwest Italy, when Domitian, the emperor, ran all the philosophers out of Rome, which his popularity numbers rose right away when he did that. But Epictetus started having people come to see him, and he started talking to people about these very kind of issues. What divides people? What brings people together? And he said, you know what? We're all enslaved to something. He says, we're all enslaved to something. Some of the people I see in public refusing to wear face masks, refusing to do this, to do that, saying, my liberty, my liberty, my liberty. Epictetus would characterize a lot of these folks and the racist folks that we're seeing, what they're waving their flag and all this, as the least free people on earth. They're enslaved to false beliefs and bad attitudes and unhealthy emotions and self-defeating actions in the end. And so he wanted us to clean house. He wanted us to go back to Socrates, know thyself, self-examination. And he wanted to ask people, like, you know, why do you think this is a good thing? And let's free you of these attitudes. I mean, I think a lot of us are sick to death of racism being the problem that refuses to be solved in this country. We're just sick to death of it. And we're thinking, okay, what's our inflection point? Hopefully we're in that time now. Hopefully. We thought that before, right? But maybe this is different. And everybody I know is certainly doing whatever they can to try to help make this to be the inflection point where things finally change. Because there is such a waste of human potential going on in the world right now because of this. And if I can help people understand that, then I'll be doing something as a philosopher. But if you've got any ideas too, tell me. Because it's a hard nut to crack.
That's another symposium.
Yeah, it's another whole symposium, right? Because this is not a short-term problem. This is like a long-term problem. So I have a friend, he was my best friend in graduate school, a guy named Jorge Garcia. He grew up really poor like I did. He grew up in Spanish Harlem, New York. And he taught at Harvard, Kennedy School, and Georgetown. Now he teaches at Boston College, but his area of expertise is racism. So I called him a couple weeks ago just to get references for books and what should I be reading? You know, what should I be reading? Like one of our cousins has written this big definitive life of Martin Luther King, which I own on my shelves, but I've never read it before. Well, that's one thing I'm doing this summer. I'm gonna read that. I'm gonna try to educate myself as well as I can. And my friend was saying, you got to read Frederick Douglass on this, you got to read Du Bois on this, and I'm saying, okay. So he wants me to steep myself more deeply because as a philosopher, you know, I need to really be immersed in the problems in order to be able to help people with the solutions.
Tom, Will Thomason made a nice observation in the chat, which you probably don't have a chance to look at much, but he said the idea of unlearning, especially in relation to the hill analogy, rings true here.
Oh, yeah, right. That's right. Because even people who've been doing the wrong thing for a long time. So I usually use Hill A for big corporations where, you know, they've attained great success. And like Tom Peters wrote the first famous management book, right? In Search of Greatness, or In Search of Excellence. And he profiled these companies as excellent companies. Then years later, they'd all had horrible troubles or gone out of business. And he said, could I have been wrong about all these companies? And he went back and he looked at the companies that failed that he had profiled as so excellent. They all got complacent. They all got arrogant. They were not innovative. They were all stuck on my Hill A, and nobody wanted to go downhill. Well, this is a very good point, because you can be stuck on Hill A, not just when Hill A is a good thing, but you can be stuck on a bad Hill A, and you think you're on a high hill, but everybody else is saying, what is wrong with you? But you won't get off that hill. We've got to show people a better hill. And mentioned Martin Luther King, one of his points of genius was his ability to evoke imagery, right, in his speeches, to give very visual speeches in which he would show people that he'll be. And, you know, the analogy, what I love about a good image in philosophy is it can be usually applied in a lot of different ways. And there's always going to be somebody who says, yeah, but there's a limit to that analogy. But there are always limits, right? That's why it's an analogy rather than you're just showing a person the picture of the real thing. But if we can, it's a tool, and it depends on us to use it well. So there are people who are racist who think they're living on Hill A. And we've got to convince them there's a Hill B out there that's much better for them. See, that's the thing. In any racist society, you're not, in trying to get rid of the racism, you're not just trying to help people who are the obvious victims of the racism, but the racists are victims themselves of their racism. And you're trying to do something that'll help everybody get away from Hill A and get to a much better Hill B. And that's what I wish we could wake people up to. We're not just talking about helping one group of people. We're talking about elevating life for everybody. You know, as a philosopher, I'm always shooting for the universal, you know, because society, you know, in fact, I just ordered a book. It's downstairs. I don't have it with me. It's called Humankind. It's a European author arguing that the history of humanity isn't just the history portrayed by Hobbes, you know, life nasty, Brutus, and short, and it isn't just the Lord of the Flies kind of existence. It's compassion and kindness and partnership that has always pushed us along as human beings from the very beginning. And it's been in pockets. It's never been universal. But the more we can spread that, the more we can spread partnerships. And that's what really, Aristotle had this view of the city. A city is prosperous when he defines it like this: people in partnership for a shared purpose. People in partnership for a shared purpose, and as broad a spectrum of people as possible in partnership for a shared purpose. That, to me, is the formula that lifts us out of divisiveness and racism, when we understand what it is to partner as broadly as we can with other kinds of people, and that we benefit as a result of doing so. But, you know, there's a lot of people in our world right now who seem not to want to be taught, who seem not to be very teachable right now. But like I was saying with James, you know, I'm hoping that this moment will make people rethink a little bit. And, you know, there are signs of hopefulness, but we have to work hard for sure. Okay, I see something. I've got my chat feature up now. What if you get to the top of Hill A and find yourself in the clouds? Yeah, that's where a lot of people are. How about going back to home base and deepening some roots? Not sure we always have to aim so high. Yeah, you know, it's funny because you can use the imagery, Hill A and Hill B, in different ways, right? It doesn't always mean better and bigger and higher and nobler and more exalted. If you're using the imagery in terms of value, rather than public perception, rather than maybe the values that our society happens to praise at any given time, but which doesn't always coincide with the real values in life. Yeah, I mean, there are various ways to use the image, right? Go back to base camp for your next ascent, right? But that's a going downhill too, and that's the image. And here's the interesting thing about the image of going downhill from hill A. If your goal is to get to the highest point in the area in terms of value, and you're initially going downhill, it will look like you're getting farther from your true goal. Oh, he's backed off. He's going down. She's going down. She's tumbling down the side of the hill. But that's a necessary preliminary, getting outside the comfort zone, getting off of where you were perched in order to be able to get someplace new. So I know most of us have experienced that in our lives. I mean, I was on a high hill A at Notre Dame, and it was that advice, trust yourself. You know, it was Tom Treveni's advice, trust yourself. And that if you can make the process one of joy, it doesn't have to be an ordeal. Going downhill doesn't have to be, if you've ever seen a kid sled down a hill, you know it doesn't have to be an ordeal, right? But it's all about attitude. And the Stoics were all about that. It's all about the attitude you bring to the transitional points in your life that make all the difference. I appreciate every single question. Oh, somebody says Pema Chodron is one of my top 3 life influencers. Highly recommended. Yeah, the book, The Wisdom of No Escape, subtitled something about loving kindness. I've owned it for years, and I read it last week, and it was so good. It's a short book. I read it twice, cover to cover, which I almost never do. But as soon as I got to the end, I went back again, and I marked all through the book. And then I picked out my favorite passages and wrote them down on a sheet of paper so that every morning I can study those favorite passages. Last year, I read the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, 4 times. And I thought I knew the story. No, not unless you continue. C.S. Lewis said if a book is not worth reading twice, it wasn't worth reading once. And there's a lot of wisdom there. And at my point in life, I'm just going to forget. I'm going to have a great experience with a book and then forget about it 4 days later or 4 weeks later, unless I go back and go back and go back. And so I did that with Pema's book. I've done that with Homer. You know, I've done that with a number of books recently, and it really pays. It really pays off. You get deeper and deeper insights.
What was your trajectory leading into the philosophy PhD? Had you studied philosophy before that? And then what was it like to be in school for when you were doing it? Yeah,
that's a good question. So my parents hoped that I would major in business and go to law school and become a corporate attorney and maybe a business leader. And so I was taking all these courses at Chapel Hill that I didn't like. It wasn't me, but I was trying to do it for my parents. And I took a religion course with a guy named Bernard Boyd, who was kind of famous as an amazing lecturer because he had joint degrees from Princeton in biblical studies and drama. So he was this really dramatic lecturer. It was always 250 people in his class or 200 people in his class. And I ended up taking 6 of his classes. And I would be so mesmerized, I'd forget to take notes. And then there was this guy, an Orthodox rabbi in the philosophy department named George Schlesinger. Same thing. I would just get so caught up in it. I took a course on science and religion from him, and I got so caught up in it. You know, that was unbelievable. So I majored. My parents were like, no, philosophy, no, you know, but I could major in religion, and my mother, as a good Baptist, could only complain so much about that, you know. So I majored in biblical studies in the religion department at Chapel Hill. Before it was called religious studies, it was just called Department of Religion. And so I applied to religious studies graduate schools initially. Who were the best in religious studies? And so I applied, and I got in 3 places. And the other 2 places, the professors I'd worked with all had their degrees from Yale. And one of the places I got in was Yale. So I said, oh, I'm going to Yale. So I went in religious studies. But then I kept asking philosophical questions, and I kept taking philosophy courses on the side. And the director of graduate studies in the philosophy department said, hey, switch departments, come to philosophy. And I said, but I like religious studies. And he said, look, one guy years ago did a double PhD in philosophy and religious studies. And if we asked the dean, and I'm director of graduate studies in philosophy, the department you're not in, so I can recommend you and I can say, we support you, so would you come into both departments? I thought, oh, that'll double my chances on the job market, you know, forgetting what 2 times 0 is. And nobody told me, oh, by the way, you have to take double coursework. You got to take exams in both departments. You got to have 2 directors on your dissertation. Nobody mentioned that at first, you know, so I was really excited about this. And so, yeah, I was there for 6 years. I was at Yale for 6 years doing this, but it was like, I couldn't stop. It's like no stone unturned with the ultimate questions, right? I was going to pursue the philosophical questions, but what's the combination? Well, philosophy is obviously about truth and argument and precision and analysis. And what's religion about? Commitment and belief and action. And so I kind of wanted to bring the 2 together, right? I didn't want to just do the purely intellectual stuff, but I wanted to understand the commitment side of things as well. And so that led to me, I mean, my first work in philosophy professionally was to pioneer new areas in theoretical philosophy, writing articles that 34 people in the world could understand. But then I rediscovered practical philosophy, which nobody was doing, really not since Emerson 150 years ago. And practical philosophy is really the coming together of those 2 disciplines, of the intellectual and the heart, the brain and the heart, and the mind and the heart, right? And so I'm so glad I did that stuff. But it was like, it was doing the Tom Treveni thing, trust yourself. It's like, why are you studying religious studies? My mother would say, you want to be a minister? Well, no. I couldn't imagine being in a deathbed and saying, well, there are 3 arguments for life after death, and there are 3 arguments against life after death. I mean, that was not me, you know? And so I just wanted to follow the path. And that's the cool thing about process. Sometimes you have no idea where the path is going to take you. I thought I was going to be at Notre Dame my whole life. I didn't know I was going to be living at the beach in North Carolina, being a philosopher all over the world. But follow the path that feels right to you. You can't possibly set 5 or 10 year goals often that are realistic because you don't know where the path is going to take you, but set great small goals along the way. And then all kinds of things will open up. That's at least my experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You've got a question in the chat from Larry Hahn. Yeah.
From the lens of a philosopher, I'm curious. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about UNC's reopening? Oh, man. Okay. I can't ever be anything other than honest. I wish nobody was opening for the fall semester. I wish no college university were opening until we have a vaccine and a treatment that's almost universally effective. That's what I wish. Given that that's not a reality anywhere, pretty much, I saw our athletic director, Bubba Cunningham. I've known Bubba since he was 23 years old, believe it or not. I have loved Bubba since he was an intern in the Notre Dame athletic department. I have loved his character, his honesty, his integrity. I mean, in his 20s, right? And so I saw him on CBS Overtime the other day, a clip on my computer of Bubba being asked about opening up, Carolina opening up, and what the athletic department was going to do to make this safe. And if you haven't seen that, you know, Google CBS Overtime, Bubba Cunningham. Bubba lays out the conditions under which this is possible. And we'll still see, right? We'll still see. And there's so much about this illness that is still mysterious to people. How do some people get it asymptomatically? Oh, really? I had it? I've got antibodies? Wow. I didn't even feel bad. And then other people, it's like a stunning rush to, boy, I'm having trouble breathing, to, 3 days later, well, that's it, So what is this thing? We don't know. Fortunately, with people the age of Carolina students, the general numbers are pretty good. The general probabilities are pretty good. And if we can doggone help people to be smarter than I was as an undergraduate about social situations, it's doable. So, it's like fingers and toes crossed. But you listen to people like Bob there's some careful thought being put into it. So I'm hoping for the best. So optimist, pessimist, here's the truth about my life. I tend to be a short-term pessimist, a long-term optimist. Short-term, I think any crazy thing can happen, right? Long-term, things are going to work out. So, you know, Bubba gave me new confidence while watching him. It was only a short interview done at a nice, safe distance in the stadium, right? So, yeah, look at that if you haven't seen it yet.
All right, well, we're right at our time. Happy to take any more questions for Tom. If anybody wants to jump in real quick, but I do just want to say thank you again, Tom. Oh my goodness, I mean, you were the person for this job every time. We love it. It's a great opportunity to spend some quality time together on Zoom and process everything.
I just love seeing y'all smiling faces, you know,
yeah,
and I wish crazy we could be doing this in person, you know, and hopefully everything is straightened out and cleared up by the time the next forum happens, when we can actually, you know, can you imagine all the hugging that won't get done unless we can clear all this up, because we love being huggers at the forum. So I'm really looking for. I'm gonna be an optimist about that.
We hope to see you there. We're going to employ you yet again. I do want to remind everybody, we are going to do another fall 7 speaker series. So we'll have 7 speakers, and potentially we're going to do some how-to evenings as well, maybe wine tasting and things like that, where we can learn a little bit from some of our experts together. And we're also planning a midsummer panel discussion as well. We've done 1-person speakers, but we've got a really cool panel that's lining up for you all mid-July. So keep your eyes peeled for your invitations for that.